This is how Bill Burr changed Ethan Klein forever.
It seems like you're in love with your daughter, hearing you talk about her on the podcast.
Jesus Christ. Well, you're pretty perceptive. It's like you care about your own child.
It will
by all means,
compromise
keep
your
talking
privacy.
about it. Is there any way you can cut this out?
I went into therapy after that episode. I'm not even being kidding.
The Bill Burr episode on the H3H3 podcast is a staple in internet history, as the time an internet comedian met a seasoned stand-up comedian and realized very quickly that they are completely different breeds. With well over 2 million views on the H3 podcast channel, this podcast would blow up for all the wrong reasons. It was considered by many to be the podcast that changed Ethan Klein's life and brought him back down to earth. If you haven't seen this episode of the H3H3 podcast, or you have and you want a quick recap on how brutal it was, then you've come to the right place. To get a crystal clear understanding of what happened in this interview, we will take a deep dive at some of the most awkward moments and how Ethan handled them. I want to start off by saying that I do not hate Ethan Klein and that I actually used to really enjoy his old school content on YouTube. While I do not follow his podcast and current endeavors very closely, I want it to be clear that I don't intend for this to come off as a super negative video towards Ethan, because honestly I feel like most people would react the same way to a lot of Billy Burr's ball busting. Furthermore, Ethan started the H3H3 podcast almost 7 years ago, with the first episode going live on April 7th, 2017. This was a stark contrast from his edgy and obtuse brand of humor he demonstrated in his earlier videos, so the transition was incredibly rocky and difficult for him to make, given the fact that podcasting is a completely different muscle. A lot of Ethan's fans would make comments about how his interviewing skills are just not that good, and how it makes the podcast episodes incredibly awkward to watch at times. However, in the infancy of the podcast, he could get away with it a little more because most of his guests were just like other YouTubers and close friends, so the innate chemistry cloaked Ethan's novice podcasting skill set a good amount. However, 2 years after the inception of the H3 podcast, they got Bill Burr on the show, which was definitely one of their biggest guests at the time, and that camaraderie and chemistry was not there because Bill and Ethan had just met recently and had no prior relationship. In addition to them not really knowing each other, Bill is not the easiest person to interview if you're even remotely neurotic or unsure of yourself, which Ethan openly admitted live on the air that he is.
My first thought is this is the best week to be here, the week before the Super Bowl.
That is so true.
Before all the whores fly in, you know?
Yeah. But
Just want to get out.
Wow.
Just want to get out of here before that. What is true? This is like the Oscars for prostitutes.
Okay, all right.
This entire week.
Let's remember we're G-rated here.
If you're a fan of Bill Burr, which if you watch this channel there's a good chance you are fond of old Billy Redballs, you would know that he is a bleeding heart masshole who can dish a barrage of playful insults in a matter of seconds, given the fact he was ruthlessly harassed and bullied by fellow massholes, and also dished out a fair amount of his own bullying in the Boston area. It doesn't matter who you are either. From the Colin Hurds to the Joe Rogans all the way to the Ethan Kleins, the common theme with Bill Burr is he will light you up, especially if you pry at details he is privy to. Now, 95% of the time when he busts your balls, he doesn't do it with malevolence. He actually does it endearingly because it's just who he is and he's trying to be himself around you. There's plenty of interviews online of Bill Burr roasting interviewers that you can watch. However, if you're not familiar with this dynamic that stand-up comedians often have with other comedians, these little jabs and slights can be taken sort of harshly, and we absolutely see this in Bill Burr's episode on the H3 podcast. Given Ethan's inexperience with podcasting and interviewing and Bill's relentless ball-busting nature, this podcast was just destined to be a rough one for Ethan. Now, with all of this exposition being established, let's dive into the episode and highlight some of the most awkward moments. To begin with, Ethan asks Bill about playing Madison Square Garden in New York City and how it's different from a comedy club.
How does it feel playing to that many people versus like 200 people in a comedy club?
Well, it depends on how you seat it. Like, so when I did it, I had the stage on the one side, but now this time I'm doing it in the round, so it's more seats. I don't know how many it is.
In the first few minutes, this is actually pretty decent interviewing from Ethan. I gotta give credit where credit is due. This is a great question, and he actually lets Bill answer thoroughly and only chimes in when necessary. However, this doesn't last very long because eventually Bill talks about nervousness, and some of Ethan's neuroticism starts to creep into the conversation.
You know what I mean? If you went to whatever Comic-Con of podcasting, would you be nervous?
Yes.
All right. Well, you're an apprehensive
talking
person.
to a nervous guy.
I'm so neurotic. I am nervous. I'm nervous right now.
Okay. You seem relaxed.
Thank you. God. Okay, keep it together.
After Ethan reveals his nervousness to Bill, Bill subtly takes note of this and comments on it multiple times later in the episode. But you can really see Ethan start to fall apart and non-stop interrupt Bill, and this is when things really got awkward. Then Bill talks a little bit about women's self-defense and how he wants his daughter to partake, and he makes a joke that Hila laughs at and he himself chuckles at, but Ethan seems to just not react to it.
And I just figure like a guy's going to try to gorilla his way in and try to hold you down or whatever, and then all of a sudden he's tapping out, you blow out his elbow. And that's an erection killer right there, man. You blow out the elbow.
As it,
I think that's slang for the armbar. I think it's called the erection
blow
killer.
out the old.
Then you notice he tries to awkwardly segue into something else instead of acknowledging the joke or adding to the discussion. Bill immediately calls him out for projecting his OCD onto him.
I feel like that's a new thing. You're already worried about your daughter being assaulted. You know, how old's your daughter?
I don't think that is. I think that's you projecting your OCD on me. It's
well, you're talking about, you know, you want your 2-year-old daughter to get Krav Maga so she can knife a dude's neck.
So after this one, you can visibly see the anxiety and nerves amplify on Ethan's face. This is when things really start to take a turn for the awkward in this interview. Then Ethan and Bill transition to talking about the dog whisperer, and Ethan talks about how he doesn't truly know if that guy even knows what he's talking about. And then Bill just calls him cynical right to his face in a playful way.
Does he even know anything? I also wonder, does he just pretend like he knows and then we believe him? You know what I mean?
I don't know. I mean, you're right. You're really.
I mean, he's doing this. I mean, what does that do?
Well, I think the guy knows what he's doing.
Okay.
You're a really cynical guy, man.
I thought you were down. I thought you were going to be down.
That is a lot for me to say that.
Credit to Ethan because he took this one on the chin pretty well and then just steered the conversation elsewhere. Then after some ad reads, Ethan and Bill watch some videos, and this part seems like it's relatively easygoing and smooth sailing for both of them, but then a little bit later is when things really start to go off the rails even more so. Ethan then comments on Bill Burr's love for his daughter and makes it pretty weird. Check this out.
It seems like you're in love with your daughter, hearing you talk about her on the podcast.
Jesus Christ. Well, you're pretty perceptive. You think you care about your own child.
Listen, more than that, okay? Because again, you're this character.
Ethan immediately gets defensive, and you can really start to see him get rattled with the situation, and he doesn't try to bust Bill's balls back because he knows he would get cooked right back in an instant, and I don't know if he could handle that. Then one of the most awkward moments of the podcast was when Bill talks very briefly about his childhood, and Ethan proceeds to ask him how many brothers and sisters he had, but Bill tells him he doesn't want to answer. Then Ethan pries a little bit, and it doesn't go well for him.
Really? How many siblings do you have?
I don't know, dude. The internet's too fucking weird to give out all that information.
Oh, you don't even want to say how many because you're afraid that it will somehow
by all means,
compromise
keep
your
talking
privacy.
about it. Is there any way you can cut this out? I'm honest, dude. Like,
seriously?
Yeah, no, dude. There's fucking lunatics out there. Jeez. I love how surprised he is. Jeez.
Well, you can mention the amount.
Absolutely crazy people out
Okay,
there.
yeah.
Then you can see Ethan once again visibly get uncomfortable and also verbally mutter to himself quietly as if he's really just shutting down. He didn't really know how to handle Bill's genuine pushback on the spot, so he just shut down for a bit, and then Bill continued to rag on him a little harder. Bill, being who he is, just lays into him again and again and makes it pretty funny. So these were just a few of the awkward moments from the H3 podcast with Bill Burr that really made this episode an incredibly difficult watch. Also, if you go to the comments, you can see people commenting about how awkward and brutal this was to watch. I'll read a few of them for you. This was just an hour of Bill Burr shattering Ethan's ego. Man, rewatching it, this actually got off to a great start, and Bill gives him a few outs, but eventually gets exhausted from the weird questions and goes in. Ethan was out of his depth here. Bill Burr got his start at the Comedy Cellar, a club that was the gathering place of some of the greatest roasters and downright villainous insult geniuses like Patrice O'Neal, Colin Quinn, Bob Kelly, etc. While the third comment was a bit harsh, it seems like most people here are on the same page about how Ethan was just out of his element trying to keep up with and contain Bill Burr within his formulaic style of questioning. I especially agree with the second comment because on a second listen, the beginning really isn't that bad. It only starts to really get bad in the final third of the podcast. Even Ethan's Reddit community has an entire thread dedicated to talking about this interview and how it was a tough watch and how it could have been much better if Ethan just ditched the questions and tried to have a regular organic conversation with Bill Burr on the air. I will say that despite the awkward moments of the podcast, it certainly is not as bad as it could have been, but at this time Ethan was receiving a lot of extra negative attention from the commentary community for ditching his regular videos on his main channel just to do the podcast. So this interview not being Ethan's best work, I think was a very convenient avenue for a lot of his his fan base that was angry about the lack of content on his main channel and started to turn on him. And at the time, his return was with a big ad for a game instead of actual content. Then the aftermath of this was interesting because Ethan would then go on Theo Von's podcast to talk about the Bill Burr interview. Theo Von had also just recently had kind of a weird podcast himself with Bill Burr, but obviously being a seasoned stand-up comedian, Theo took it a lot better than Ethan did. I thought it was interesting to hear Ethan talk about it though, because he said he went into therapy after and how it really devastated him.
I went into therapy after that episode.
Did you really?
I'm not even being kidding. I was having a depressive episode for a long time. It was soul crushing.
And was it soul crushing because you felt like as an interviewer it was soul crushing, or just like on a human level? Like, do you know the levels where it felt that it hit you?
My fans were, I don't know, but the audience were very harsh. As an interviewer, I felt like a failure. It was just off. It didn't feel that bad, but it was the reaction, the audience reaction to it afterwards. I mean, I knew I had goofed up and that it was not the best interview, and I was such a big fan of Bill Burr, obviously, who isn't. He's a legend. It felt like a rock bottom for me because I was having a hard time with the podcast and interviews in general.
I think this introspection was incredibly honest and good from Ethan. I think he hit the nail on the head for why the podcast was as awkward as it was for the time. I also think the comment about exposing his vulnerabilities and Bill exposing the impurities in his armor is incredibly observant, and even though it's not done with malice, it is a pretty solid diagnosis of how Bill busts balls. I think one of the best examples of this was when he cooks Joe Rogan a little bit on his podcast for his opinion on masks so early in the pandemic. This is one of my favorite Bill Burr riffs of all time on a podcast. Check it out.
You want people to walk down the street with a mask on?
Let's not start this, Joe.
Do you, though?
Let's not start this. Okay.
Let's start it.
I don't want to start this bullshit. I'm not going to sit here with no medical degree, listening to you with no medical degree, with an American flag behind you, smoking a cigar, acting like we know what's up better than the CDC. And wait. And then everybody wore the fucking masks. This is like rollerblading. Everybody fucking rollerbladed, and then there was that one fucking homophobic joke, and then everybody acted like they never did it. And then 100 million fucking rollerblades got thrown into the fucking ocean. We all wore masks. And then all of a sudden, people are fucking sitting there. Well, you don't have the body type for it, dude. Your fucking knuckles would scrape on the ground. Even with that extra 2 inches. I just love how wearing a mask became like this fucking like soft thing that you were doing, like being courteous.
Bitches.
Being courteous. Why is this for bitches? That was so
You're wearing a
stupid.
mask. First of all, it's
Oh,
not-
God, you're so tough with your fucking open nose and throat. Gee, Joe, and your 5 o'clock shadow. This is a man right here.
It's absolutely hilarious, and Bill takes the seemingly strong point of Joe's and uses it to poke some fun at him. And since Joe Rogan is a comedian who came up in Boston with Bill Burr, Patrice O'Neal, and Bobby Kelly, he takes it on the chin and just laughs it off. To give Ethan even more credit, he would go on to have Bill Burr on as a guest a second time on the podcast, and this episode was much improved from the last time. In this episode, Bill Burr, Hila, and Ethan all have much more chemistry, and there's one point where Bill even says he was worried about Ethan and gives him some advice pertaining to his nutrition, health, and weight loss. This interview is much better, and it seems like Ethan and Bill came together despite past awkwardness and made for a genuinely decent podcast episode. Even though the first podcast was a little bit grueling for Ethan, and to his own admission even sent him into therapy, I think he learned from the criticism and decided to grow from it. This would make the second Bill Burr podcast episode much better than the first, and I think it even gave Ethan a wider view of how he could improve not just as an interviewer, but also as a human being. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this in the comments, but I didn't want this to be a dog pile of Ethan Klein. I really just wanted to highlight where he fell short in the first episode to me, but after attending therapy and working on himself, he changed his life for the better, and this was reflected by his second interview with Bill when he's in much better spirits, and Bill picks up on this and takes it quite easy on him. All in all, this was how Bill Burr changed Ethan Klein forever. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching the video to the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to support the channel by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on post notifications down below, because that's a free way to help the channel out, and it also helps the community grow brick by brick. I want the YouTube family to hit 100,000 subscribers this year, so please help me out with that by subscribing to the channel. If you want to support the channel further, you can check out the Patreon page down below, where you can get some exclusive benefits like getting to see videos early, getting to see exclusive content like a podcast I recently recorded and my set at the Tampa Improv. You also get to play a direct hand in the direction my channel takes, and you get shoutouts every single video. Shout out to Jason Murray, Crossblocker, Ethan, Thomas Gill, and Karsten, the newest patron, for supporting me on Patreon. Anyway, hope you guys love the video. Make sure you take care of yourselves, your friends, your family, and your loved ones. I love you, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.